Andy Hake here with Insulwise in Pittsburgh, and what we're going to demonstrate and show you guys here today is how to use vinyl kerf weather stripping to make a permanent seal around an old door. Now the problem here is that with these old doors, and I'll show you, they get warped over time. So you can see a gap opened up here at the bottom, and there's also a gap at the top, right up here. And that's just what happens to old doors over time. And what the homeowners notice is cold air blowing through in the wintertime on a chilly day like today when it's 30 degrees out. So what we're going to do is take our measurements for both of these sides, get those cut, put in place, measurement for the top, get that screwed into place, and at that point we'll be good to go. The main thing is to make sure that your cuts are accurate, that you take your time doing it, and that as you install the weather stripping, you're putting positive pressure on the door so that it's pushing up against it and taking up and eliminating the gaps there. And that's what's going to eliminate the draft. So the first step in this, and I should also mention that you have to install this in a way so that the door is going to close into the weather stripping. And this is what this stuff looks like up close, okay? This is actually going to be the top part, but you can see that foam rubber bumper there is what is going to press into and then close that space. This is actually for the top space. I'm going to get a measurement on each side individually. Make sure not to measure one side and assume the other's the same. These older houses, older doors, you'd be surprised how much it can be off by. Sometimes a quarter, 3/4 of an inch. 78.5. So we'll get this side cut and then come right back to it. So my first side is 78.5 inches. What I'm going to do to mark it is just use one of the screws that came with the packet. I'm at 78, 79, 78.5 is right there. And it's just making an indentation in the aluminum, but it's enough for me to see. Now this stuff can actually be pretty tricky to cut. So the way that I'm going to do this is just use a pair of metal snips. I'm going to go down and cut the metal side first and actually use my weight to cut through that. And when you do that, it'll work just fine, assuming you've got good quality snips, but you have to make sure that your hands are not under it on the concrete, or this anything hard, you'll dent them up. So I've got my hands out like this, and I'm just holding it in place and using my weight to cut through it. Sometimes with these things, the holes line up where you want them to, and sometimes you'll see where we cut it, we don't have a hole to put a screw in up here. You definitely want to have one up high. So I'm going to line this thing up kind of where we want it, and then drill a hole so I can put in an additional screw up top. Now, for some reason, the screws that come with these weather strip kits are never real deep seated, so they tend to pop out. So you just have to be prepared to have a couple kick out on you while you're doing this, and be patient, pick it up. And again, the key thing is, as you're going to be pushing this weather strip up against the door and eliminating the gap as you go. If you've done this right, the door will require a little bit of oomph when you go to close it later. So I've got one side in already. I don't know if you can tell from there, but it's pressed up close to the door. And when you take these things out of the pack, the weather stripping kind of overlaps the aluminum door frame a little bit. I'm not sure why they do it at the factory, but I just take that and snip that right off. Now I mentioned that sometimes these sides are different sizes from each other. In this case, that is the case here. This side was 78.5, the other side is 78.75. The door probably wasn't made that way, but when you're working on homes that are 100+ years old, just about nothing is ever square. So we're just about done with the second longer piece here. The holes for these kerfs are, I'd say about a 1/4 inch to 1/3 of an inch wide. It's actually a groove. It's longer than the screw is, and it allows you to get the screw started and then move the weather stripping in and out relative to the gap in the door. So what I like to do is try to get the screw as close in as I can, and then, you know, I'm pushing the kerf in as I drive the screw. Okay, so we've just got a couple of screws left to go on our top piece of kerf weather stripping, and I'll show you a better angle of what I mean about getting the screw started and then pushing it in to take up the gap. So I'm going to get my screw started. You can see that gap is maybe 1/4 to 1/3 of an inch. The screw's diameter is much smaller than that. I'm going to put that screw in as far as I can. Once it's started, the bend, the warping in the door is down here. I'm using this hand then to push that in, and then drive the screw, and the weather strip stays in place and eliminates the cold draft. Okay, so here's the finished weather stripping. You can see once it's installed how flexible it is, and just watch what it does as the door closes. And if you look at this down here, I don't know if you can tell from the angle of the camera, but the weather strip actually curves almost like a slight boomerang at the bottom and the top, and that's mimicking the warpage of the door, and that's what allows us to seal it tight. Going forward, this homeowner no longer has a cold breeze blowing through the kitchen while they're trying to cook their dinner every night. Problem solved.